impossible to prove, it would be necessary to dissociate a certain unconditional independence of thought, of the construction, of justice, of the humanities, of the university, to dissociate a certain of such unconditional independence and so forth from any phantasm of sovereign mastery. It's difficult. Well, it is once again in the humanities that one would have to make happen the thinking of this other mode of the if, this more than difficult, this impossible thing, the exceeding of the performative and the opposition quantitative performative. By thinking in the humanities, this limit of mastery and of performative conventionality, the limit of performative authority, what is one doing? One is acceding to that place where the always necessary context of the performative operation, a context that is, like every convention, an institutional context, can no longer be saturated on the very limit between the inside and the outside, notably the border of the university itself and within it of the humanities. One thinks in the humanities the irreducibility of their outside and of their future, of their to come. One thinks in the humanities that one cannot and must not let oneself be enclosed within the inside of the humanities. But for this thinking to be strong and consistent requires the humanities. To think this is not an academic, speculative, or theoretical operation, nor a neutral utopia, no more than saying it is a simple enunciation. It is on this always divisible limit. It is at this limit that what arrives, what happens, happens. It is this limit that is affected by the arriving and that changes. This limit of the impossible, the perhaps and the if, this is the place where the university is exposed to what one calls reality. To the forces from without, be they cultural, ideological, political, economic, or other. It is there that the university is in the world, that it is attempting to think. On this border, it must therefore negotiate and organize its resistance and take its responsibilities. Not in order to enclose itself and reconstitute the abstract phantasm of sovereignty with theological or humanist heritage it will perhaps have begun to deconstruct, if at least it has begun to do so. But in order to resist effectively by aligning itself with extra academic forces, in order to organize an inventive resistance through its oeuvre, its works, to all attempts at reappropriation, political, juridical, economic, and so forth, to all the other figures of sovereignty. I do not have time to justify any further my profession of faith. I do not know if what I'm saying here is intelligible, if it makes sense, or if it's helpful. I especially do not know what status, genre, or legitimacy the discourse has that I've just addressed to you. Is it academic? Is it a discourse of knowledge in the humanities or on the subject of the humanities? Is it knowledge only? Only a performative profession of faith? Does it belong to the inside of the university? Is it philosophy or literature or theater? Is it a work, an oeuvre, or a course or a kind of seminar? I have numerous hypotheses on the subject, but finally it will be up to you now. It will be up to you, but also to others to decide this. The signatories are also the addressees. We do not know them, the addressees, neither you nor I. For if this impossible that I'm talking about were to happen or to arrive, perhaps one day, I leave you to imagine the consequences. Take your time, but be quick about it because you do not know what awaits you. Thank you.
Professor Derrida, you use language that's often used theologically. And that makes me ask whether there's any place in the humanities or in a university without conditions for the discipline of theology?
Well, I think what I said obviously, I hope, obviously implied that not only there is a place for theology, but theology should be one of the most indispensable places. Now, what should we do in this theology department? That's something else. But of course, we could not address these issues, all these issues, whether the issue of sovereignty, the figure of man, the history of work, the notion of profession and confession. We could not start thinking about these things without the help of theology, of theological knowledge, expertise. That's clear. I'm clear on that. Very clear. I myself often refer to it. So not only should theology be taught in a department of theology as a discipline, but theology should be taught everywhere in a certain way. In politics, in genetics, in literature, of course. I try to take this into account in many texts of mine, but in the logic of the speech I just gave, it's obvious that theology should play a major role in the university. Now, this doesn't mean that it should occupy the place it occupied in the past, okay? Because I implicitly refer to Kant more than once, and to the Kant of the conflict of the faculties, in which at a given moment in history, he tries to account for and to justify the organization of the faculty, the university. So he has what he calls the upper faculties: law, medicine, theology. Law, medicine, theology, and they are the higher, the upper faculties. And then the lowest is philosophy, because it's more distant from the power, the state power. But the philosophy faculty, even if it's the lowest, more distant from the power, is the freest. It has the freedom to say everything, which is pertinent to the truth, under the condition that it say that's where I would disagree with Kant, although I'm a great admirer of him and of this work. Under the condition that this freedom remains inside the university, that everything true should be said by the philosophy without the control of the censorship of the state. That's what the philosophy department is free. The philosophers could say everything they think is true or necessary to the truth, under the condition that it remains within the university, not in the wide public space. But theology, in the hierarchy, is above and on the side of the state, and so on and so on. And it links theology to the state as well as medicine and law. So that's not exactly the place I would assign to theology in this new humanities. So it would be a kind of deconstructive theology. Okay? And well, that's something which more or less flourishes these days in this country. Deconstructive theology. It's very equivocal, and I'm very, very heterogeneous. There are a lot of things happening today, especially in the United States, in theology departments, more in Catholic departments than others, in which they take into account, let's say, deconstruction and continue to do their work, their theological work. I think this is necessary.
I just wanted to ask you about the concept of authority that emerged at some moments quite explicitly, otherwise it was diffused in the book. I'm going to address the concept of authority in the unconditionality of in the context of the unconditionality of the demand of the university, and also in that performative as if of professionalization, because I see that issue of authority central to the irredentist and resistant structure of university that you gave us as a pledge of the
Yeah, thank you. Now, your question touches something which remained very elliptical in my long lecture. The lecture was too long, but very elliptical. But but on the one hand, I tried to analyze the structure of the professional faith, the professional professor, which implies authority. The profession, the commitment, goes one hand in hand with authority. Okay, the authority of the professor lies in his commitment, not in his knowledge, not simply in his skill or competence, but in his pledge, in his commitment. I try to analyze not only this fact, this structure, but the necessity of confirming this structure, and that I'm in favor of the profession of professor on one hand. And of course, there would be no organized resistance without some such authority, whether deserved or not. That's another problem. But if it is deserved, it's all the better. But there would be no organized force of resistance of the university without this performative authority. That's one layer of the logic of my lecture. But there was something apparently in contradiction with this. Because at some point, not only does this authority change today, the figure of the authority, because of what's happening, and I try to describe this history of and what is happening today, but also because at some point the performative force is and has to be defeated by what I call the event. And at that point, the authority of the professor is not the last word. And, there is a point at which what happens defies the authority of the professor. And this might happen in the political field, in the social field, outside the university. But this could happen in the seminar. This could happen here, when suddenly something happens through the voice of a student, the voice of someone who has no authority, and who in fact happens to the professor and defeats or exceeds the authority of the professor and changes the situation. And the university should be open to this possibility. Might be dangerous, might be very dangerous. But if one wants to be insured against anything dangerous, then the thing would happen. Okay? So might be threatening. The fact that in a seminar suddenly a voice of someone who had no capacity, no authority, no status, such a voice can dismantle the discourse of the professor, and powerfully so. So this might be an event that I wanted to refer to this possibility. This could happen within, inside what we call the inside of the university, but which will already be the outside. The outside can speak inside again, and this would be an event beyond the limits of what one calls the performative, as if the convention, the conventionality, the institutionality. That's where the institution can be, of course, dismantled, undermined by whatever, something which might be negative, threatening, criminal, or by something which would be an invention, something new, something absolutely innovative, or and so on and so forth. That's the perhaps. When you say perhaps, the best and the worst can't happen. But if you want to have a criterion to avoid the threat and to welcome only something which is promising, then that's the end of history, the end of the event.
I wondered if you could say something more about Lecture 7, the with respect to the other six. And in doing that, if you could talk more about how you read history in the context of this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, of course, the seventh point was the one which matters to you most. On the one hand, of course, in reference to history, there are two concepts of history. One depends precisely on everything before the seventh. That is the performative, the production of event, the authority, the symbolic, and so on and so forth. There is history to that extent. There is a history of the university, of the profession, and so on and so forth, for which we need the conceptive performative distinction. That's one concept of history. And there is another concept of history, which depends on the unpredictability of the event, something which happens without being predicted, programmed, without any horizon. That's what makes history history. And this other concept of history defeats again, or exceeds the opposition, the concept of performative. And that it is difficult because politically, our political responsibility within the university and everywhere implies a negotiation between the sixth first point and the seventh, the logic of the seventh one. We have to negotiate between the performative, that is the control, the conventional, active, and the opening to the irreducible otherness of the other, the one who arrives in the room uninvited, okay? And that the two concepts of hospitality: the hospitality of the invitation, that you invite someone, come, but you should respect the rule of my home, my nation, my institution. And the other concept is of hospitality is the concept of visitation, not invitation, but visitation. The arrival of the newcomer, totally unexpected, and to whom you don't ask any question, just come. And it might be dangerous. The newcomer might be very dangerous. But without this newcomer and this dangerous event, there would be no history either. So that's where I try to. It's difficult. It's difficult to negotiate. We have to negotiate between these two logics. Now, if I insisted so much on the distinction between constitutive and performative, it's because on the one hand it's very useful. It's a new distinction. It's a modern distinction, very helpful, and it's. And we know that it has been helpful to a lot of us for years now, for decades, within the university. So I have great respect for Austin for this distinction, very productive one. But at some point, I think it not only does it obliterate something else, the event, but it's also the exploitation of this distinction is a symptom of something which happened in the university during the last decades. We were why were we so interested in this distinction? Because it gives us back the illusion of a power, the power of language. Language make things happen. Okay? And in the university, we, through the language, we are producing events. And it's a reassuring distinction at some point. So I wanted to make people a little more anxious about the exploitation of this distinction. In other texts and contexts, I tried to ask questions about the functioning of this distinction. I didn't go very far today in the inner functioning of this distinction by Austin. But I wanted today only to point to a possible symptomatology of the inflation of the use we've made of this important distinction.
There's probably time for one more question. So, hand back there.
If the university should remain external from politics and from outside events, can it still have a positive influence on the external world, constructive influence?
I never said God. I never said. What is the expression? God, no. I mean, Dieu me préserve. God.